Welcome everyone to Pathways Through the Orchard. Tonight is Parshat Mekeitz. I'll also take this opportunity to bless everyone with a Chanukah Sameach. And even though we're learning Parsha, as we'll see as we go through a number of different insights into the Parsha, it is very connected to Chanukah, because Parshat Mekeitz always will come out during, right before, right after, usually right in the middle of Chanukah. So this parsha is very, very connected to Chanukah. So we'll start with the first verse, after which the parsha is named. And it says, Vayehi Mekeitz Shanatayim Yamim. And it was after 2 years of days, Uparo Cholem, Paro had a dream, V'hinei Omed Al Yaor. And behold, the beginning of the dream, he's standing on the shore of the Nile River. So it's called Mekeitz from the word, it was at the end of 2 years of days. That's what Mekeitz. Keitz means end. So there's a verse in Eov that says the following. Keitz sam lemavet. Keitz sam lechoshech. And this is talking about God. This is from the book of Job. And Job says that God makes an end of darkness. Ulachol tachlit hu choker. And to every purpose, he investigates. The Evan, excuse me one second. Evan Ophel Vitsalmavet. The earth, the brass, the earth, let me get this right. I'm going to say it again. Evan, the Ophel Vitsalmavet. Stones of darkness and the shadow of death. Sal mavet, sel, shadow mavet, death. So again, I'm just going to read it in English. He puts an end to darkness and searches out all, here it says perfection. He searches out every purpose. The stones of darkness and the shadow of death. So this verse is always brought in connection with this parsha, because it begins, Vayehi Mekeitz Shanatayim Yamim, and it was at the end of 2 years of days. What is it talking about here? Yosef was in jail for 10 years, and then he interpreted the dreams of the butler and the baker, and the butler was returned to his position as Yosef interpreted his dream, predicted, and the baker, as Yosef said would happen, was hung. So he said to the baker, he said, when you get out of here, please remember me to Pharaoh. I'm innocent. I'm here for 10 years. Please tell him that it's unfair. I'm stuck here and I didn't do anything wrong. And then the parsha ends that the butler was let go and he returned to his position, but he forgot about Yosef. And now this parsha begins, And it was at the end of 2 more years. So in other words, Yosef spent 12 years in jail. And these are the extra 2 years. And then Pharaoh has his dream. No one can interpret his dream. And then the butler, all of a sudden, when it's good for him, remembers Yosef, tells Pharaoh, and Pharaoh says, bring this guy to me. No one else can interpret my dreams. And that begins the whole story of how Yosef rose to be the second most powerful person, not just in Egypt, but in the entire world. Egypt was the greatest empire at that time, the most powerful. So Yosef rose to be the second most powerful person in the world. And so this key word, keitz, at the end of, is interpreted by so many commentaries with this verse in Eov, keitz sam lechoshech, that God puts an end to darkness. Now, Yosef is an archetypal figure. We have the very, very important teaching, Maaseh Avot Siman Labanim, the deeds of the patriarchs and the matriarchs, and the great figures in the Torah, like Yosef, Moshe, Aaron. These are archetypal figures that everything that is happening to them, it foretells much bigger things than just their own lives. So here, it's not just that Yosef as an individual person gets out of jail. Remember, he was sold as a slave, and now he rises to be the second most important person in the world. And so this is a mini event of what will happen to all of Israel. All of Israel will end up going down to Egypt, like Yosef went down to Egypt, will end up being slaves, like Yosef was slaves, and would end up being freed from Egypt. And when they were freed, they actually were given a lot of wealth from the Egyptians as they left. And here Yosef became, he was in charge of everything. He became the most, he fed the whole world. So his story is a mini story of what's going to happen to all of Israel. So if you go to the Haggadah of Pesach, so in the fifth part of the Haggadah called Magid, when we tell the whole story, the whole history of the Jewish people, going all the way back to Avram. So here it says, Baruch Shomer Havtachato Yisrael. Blessed is the one who guards his promise to Israel. Baruch Hu, blessed is he. Shakadosh Baruch Hu choshev et ha-keitz la'asot. That God figured out the keitz, that's the word in our parsha, Mekeitz, keitz sam lechoshech, an end God made to darkness. So God figures out, accounts for the end. So how is this understood? So here we need a gematria. Keitz is gematria 190. Now, in the Haggadah, it continues. Kamasha Amar la'Avram Avinu, like God said to Avram Avinu, B'brit ben B'tarim, at the covenant of the pieces. Shneamar, and then it goes on, and God says, V'ino otam arba ma'ot shana. He says to Avram, your descendants will go down, will descend, and will be oppressed for 400 years. Now, it's brought in the commentary, so we would expect that we were in Egypt for 400 years. But Rashi points out that we were actually only in Egypt 210 years. So that's what it means, that blessed is he who makes an accounting of the keitz. If you add 190, or let's do the opposite. If we were supposed to be there 400 years and you subtract 190 years, what would you get? 210. So that's what the Haggadah means, that because we cried out in such pain that the Torah says that God knew that he had to bring us out now. So he subtracted 190 years from the accounting of 400 years that he had told Avram. And again, that's what it means in the Haggadah. Shakadosh Baruch Hu chishev et keitz la'asot. He figured out the end. Here it's like he figured out, I need to subtract 190 years, keitz, from the 400, and to do it, la'asot. So here we have what is happening to Yosef ends up happening to all of Israel. And that's why the parsha begins. And it was at the end of 2 years. It was 2 years for Yosef, but as an archetypal figure, this end had a certain force that's what an archetype means. It's an energy that repeats itself in every generation. So this keitz is repeated at the time that we come out of Egypt. Just like Yosef comes out of prison, we come out of slavery. And the key word here is keitz. Now, I said already that this parsha is always connected to Chanukah. And so Chanukah comes at the darkest time of the year, meaning that the nights are the longest and the days are the shortest. So it means that there's, in the 24-hour period, there's more darkness at this time of year. We're getting towards the winter solstice, where at that point, it is the darkest time of the year. And Chanukah always comes just either before, in the middle, or after the solstice, always. And so this same verse from Job, keitz sam lechoshech, this is what Chanukah is all about, that God makes an end to darkness. And what happens after Chanukah, it starts getting lighter, more light. So that's a very deep connection between Chanukah and this parsha. And the key word again is keitz, the end of darkness. Now, so what's the connection with darkness here? Is that in the second verse of the Torah, it reads, V'ha'oretz hayta tohu v'vohu v'choshech al pnei ha'tahom. And it was that the earth was chaotic and void, and darkness on the face of the deep, of the abyss. So the Midrash Rabbah says that the 4 words here, tohu, vohu, choshech, and tahom, chaotic, void, darkness, and abyss, these 4 words represent the 4 exiles that the Jewish people will go through. So the Midrash says, tohu, this is Babylonia. Vohu, this is Persia. Darkness, this is Greece. This is the story of Chanukah. And the abyss is Rome. And technically, we are still in the exile of Rome 2,000 years later, even though we're back in Israel. But as we can see from current events, we're not quite over exile. We're not quite over it yet. So Choshech is connected to Greece. So I want to now go back to this verse in Job. And the first part, again, we've been saying over and over again. Keitz sam lechoshech. God put an end to darkness, but the continuation is ulechol tachlit hu choker, and to every purpose God will investigate. Even ofel b'tzal mavet, a stones of darkness and the shadow of death. So it's brought down in the Gemara. What is this shadow of death we're talking about? What is this stones of darkness? And so the commentaries tell us that this is a hint to the evil inclination, the Yetzer Hara. And what's the connection to darkness? So this is a famous Torah from Rabbi Nachman, who says more than the Yetzer Hara tries to get us to sin, his real purpose is that we will enter into a state of depression. In other words, we know that you do something wrong, you can do tshuva, you can fix it, you can change. But what happens if you do something wrong, or you have low self-esteem, you are frustrated with life, you're not successful, whatever it is, and you fall into depression? So Rabbi Nachman says that's when the Yetzer Hara kind of like goes like, that's what I wanted, right? The sin, he knows that we can do tshuva. But once you fall into the darkness of depression, then the Yetzer Hara has you where he wants you. And that's why, as we already mentioned, the idea that just like Yosef goes down into slavery and then comes up out of slavery, that's what happened to all the Jewish people. In the next insight, we're going to go deeper into this. But if you look at the last 3 plagues, they all have to do with darkness. The 8th plague is locusts. And it says specifically in the Torah that the locusts were so thick that they blotted out the sun. They come in these swarms that are miles and miles and miles long, and they blotted out the sun. The 9th plague is darkness itself. And there we're told that the people, they couldn't see each other. And so we're told that this is symbolic of depression. That when someone is depressed, all they can see is their own pain. They can't really relate to anyone or anything. It's all through the lens of their own depression. And then it says in the Torah that the darkness was so thick, a person could not stand up. And so this is also a hint about depression, that it's known that people who are clinically depressed quite literally have a hard time getting out of bed. They're lethargic. Their whole body is like moving in slow motion. They have no energy. And so that's what this verse, that God puts an end to darkness. When we turn to God, like in the song that we just played, Esa einai elahari me'ayin yavo ezri. I turn my eyes to the mountains. From where will my help come from? So when we turn to Hashem in prayer, then God can put an end to darkness. He can help us put an end to darkness. And so, of course, when we light the candles of Chanukah, the message, the theme, the idea is to add light to the world, to dispel the darkness, to light up our neshamas, that even if we're surrounded by darkness, we can add light to the world. So going back to the first verse, so again, it says that at the end of 2 years of days, and Pharaoh dreamed. So I believe I bring this in either Orchard of Delights or Fruits of the Orchard. A Hasidic teaching is that the way we usually read it is that Pharaoh has a dream, and because of the dream, Yosef is let out of jail. But our tradition in the Talmud is, on what day did Yosef come out of jail? Rosh Hashanah. According to tradition, it was on Rosh Hashanah. And so the Ishbitzer Rebbe explains that it's not so much that Pharaoh dreamed, and because of that, Yosef is let out of jail. He says it's just the opposite. Pharaoh dreamt because Yosef, on Rosh Hashanah, his prayer was, Ribono Sh'olam, I really can't take it anymore. I'm here 12 years. I've trusted the whole time that when it's ready for me to come out, I will come out. But I'm at the end here. I'm at the keitz. I'm at the end. And the Ishbitzer Rebbe says, as soon as he prayed that, that's when Pharaoh had his dream. In other words, Yosef's prayer caused Pharaoh to dream in a way that the only one who would be able to interpret it was Yosef himself. So here we see something that we can all learn from this. We all have periods where we feel the darkness around us or within us. We're all human. We have our ups and we have our downs. And the reality of the world sometimes is absolutely overwhelming. And we all go through our struggles, our periods of we used a symbol of darkness. And so here we're told that just like Yosef is finally able to come out of the jail through the strength of his prayer, that's what put an end to the darkness. And that's what put the end to his 12 years in jail and Pharaoh dreams, and led to everything that would allow Yosef to be free. So this is our first insight. So I'll give us all a blessing already. Keitz sam l'choshech. Everyone remember those 3 words. Put an end to darkness. And if you can't do it by yourself, turn to God and ask for his help. Because I can't be in this darkness. I can't. Yes, things can be hard. Yes, I'm struggling, but I can't be in this darkness. I need some light. So I bless everyone to have the strength to get out of darkness through our own willpower. But if it falls a little bit short, so we have who to turn to for help. So our second insight is very, very connected to the first. And again, we start with this idea of Yosef being an archetypal figure. This is a very, very important statement. I'm sure you've heard me say this many times, but really the only way to understand the Torah properly is when we're, especially Sefer Bereshit and Shemot, that have so many stories. When we're reading all these stories, they're not about just individuals thousands of years ago. It's not just their story, it's our story. Each and every one of us has a little bit of these figures within us. And so when we're talking about Yosef, so one of the ideas that's associated with Yosef is a very, very important concept that runs through all of Hasidic thought, and it's called Yerida Tzorach Aliyah. You go down in order to come up. Yerida, that's called going down. L'tzorach, for the purpose of going up. So in the bigger picture, when we look at the entire Torah, the 5 books of Moshe, we see that 4.5 of the books have to do with our going down to Egypt, coming up out of Egypt, and the 40 years spent in the desert till we get to the entrance to the Holy Land. So we're told that the whole Torah is this idea of the soul coming from a very heavenly abode, comes down, Yerida, comes down into a body, a physical material world. And then the challenge is, how do we go back up? Once we're now, the soul is in the body, the propensity of the body is to bring us down, to ground us. It's not necessarily bad all the time. A person needs to be grounded, just like Yaakov has a dream of the ladder. And the ladder is firmly entrenched in the ground, but its head reached the heavens. So a person can't just have their head in the heavens. We all have to be grounded. And in fact, the more grounded we are, the more possibility we have to rise to the top of the ladder. So Yosef, he's the first. He is sold into slavery. He suffers tremendously. He is enslaved. He's a slave. He's in jail for 12 years and oppressed. And then he comes out, and eventually, right before he dies, Yosef made his brothers promise that when they come out of Egypt, because he already saw what is going to happen prophetically, he said, make sure to take my bones with you. And according to tradition, the night that we left Egypt, so all the people, as I mentioned before, the Egyptians were giving them all kinds of riches as God had promised. What was Moshe doing? He was looking for the bones of Yosef, because Israel had promised to take the bones of Yosef. And one of the traditions is on the merit of the bones of Yosef, the Reed Sea opened. The miracle of the Reed Sea was on the merit of the bones of Yosef. So here we see that 4.5 of the 5 books of the Torah relate to this idea of going down into Egypt and then coming up out of Egypt. And this becomes an allegory, a metaphor for each and every soul that goes down into a physical body, spends its life with the struggles of this world. Struggle is not necessarily bad, by the way, but we all have our challenges. We all struggle. When we are able to break through the obstacles, then we can merit great success. So the name Israel itself, Yisrael, means Kisarita im Elokim v'anashim v'tuchal. You fought, you struggled with God and man, and you prevailed. That's the meaning of Yisrael. So everything that's happening to Yosef is going to happen to Israel. Now, we even see it before Yosef with Avram and Sarah. If you remember, God says to Avram and Sarah, Lech lecha, go out of your land, from your birthplace, from your father's house, and go to the land I will show you. Avram and Sarah come to Israel, and almost the first thing happens is there's a famine, and they have to go down to Egypt. What happens when they go to Egypt? Pharaoh, the servants of Pharaoh, take Sarah, because she's so beautiful, and brings her to Pharaoh. And in the Torah, it says that God sent a plague on Pharaoh, and he came to realize that Sarah was Avram's wife, not his sister. And he sent them away with riches, and they went back up to Israel. So this is exactly what happened not only to Joseph, but to all of Israel. Why did Yaakov go down to Egypt? There was a famine. And we ended up, Avram was there a short time. We were there for 210 years, as we just learned. So, Ma'aseh Avot Simin Labanim. So, the actions of the fathers and the mothers are a sign for the children. So here, not only does everything that happens to Avram eventually happen to the Jewish people, but now we see with Yosef as well. So there's a beautiful Rashi in Parshat Ki Tavo, in the book of Devarim, Deuteronomy, talking about the mitzvah of bikurim, the first fruits. And so the idea is, of the 7 fruits of Eretz Yisrael, we take the first fruits. Just, you could have 100 acres of fruit trees, but when you, if it's one of the 7 fruits of Eretz Yisrael, 2 of them are grains, so there's 5 fruits. So if you take, if you see the first fruit that is ripening, that becomes the first fruits, and then we take them at the time of the temple up to Jerusalem. We bring them to the temple, and we actually say it's like a speech. And if you look at the speech, it's written in Parshat Ki Tavo in Devarim. The speech is the kernel of the Haggadah, because it starts by saying, we come from idol worshipers, we went down to Egypt, and we were oppressed, and then we came out, and God, you brought us to a land full of plenty and productive, and here I'm bringing my first fruits as you commanded. So in short, that was the inspiration for the Haggadah, to tell the whole story of the Jewish people, not just about what happened in Egypt, but the whole story going back to Abraham. So Rashi there explains, well, how exactly did they mark or determine which fruits were the first fruits? And so Rashi says, Adam yored bisadehu. A man goes down into his field and he sees the first fruit and he takes a like in today's language, it's like a rubber band. He takes like a string and he ties it around the fruit and he says, Zeh bikurim, this is the first fruits. So there's a lot of Hasidic discussion on Rashi's words, Adam yored bisadehu. A man goes down into his field. And it's interpreted, that's why I'm bringing it here, the same idea that all of us, our souls are coming from a very, very high, elevated, heavenly place. And then we are sent into this world because there is something about this world. We would say, look, why do we have to come down to a physical, material, somewhat blemished world? We were like in heaven. What do we need this for? And so, even though it's not an easy answer, but we're told there's something about this world that when we follow the Torah, we do the mitzvot, we attach ourselves to Hashem, we deal with the obstacles and the tests of this world, the soul returns to a higher place than it was before. And this is our theme, Yerida L'tzorach Aliyah, going down in order to go up. So there is a verse that says, Sheva yipol tzaddik v'kam. 7 times a tzaddik falls and gets up. V'kam. He gets up. So the first question many people ask is like, why are tzaddikim, why are righteous people falling? They're tzaddikim. So this is a very, very important verse that we're told the greater the tzaddik, the greater the evil inclination. So we would think just the opposite. The more righteous a person is, the less they have to deal with their yetzer hara. But we're told it's just the opposite, but it's a very subtle yetzer hara. It's the yetzer hara of pride, of egotism. That a tzaddik is not doing sins, but a tzaddik will have many challenges, especially when everyone in the world is coming to the tzaddik with all of their problems and all of their weight. We can't even imagine how much weight is on the shoulders of a tzaddik. So 7 times a tzaddik falls, but gets up. So the word here is v'kam, and rises up. So the same, just a little different grammatically, is yakum. Yakum is in the future. He will get up. Yakum it's the same. It's the same letters as vakam, except we're adding a yud for the future. So if you take the word yakum, it equals Yosef, 156. And so we're told who is the figure, maybe the greatest figure of Yerida L'tzorach Aliyah, of going down in order to come up. It's Yosef. Yosef, can you imagine? Sold by your brothers. You become a slave. You are thrown in jail under false pretenses. and you're there for 12 years, and only then do you come up. So the amazing thing about Yosef, why he's the archetypal figure of Yakum, he will get up, is we see in the Torah, not the Midrash, in the Torah itself, when he was sold into slavery to the house of Potiphar, it says that Potiphar soon realized that Yosef is such a benefit to him. He put his whole house into Yosef's hands. And the Torah says that God was with Yosef, and everything he did was successful. Then he's under false pretenses. He's thrown in jail from the false accusation of Potiphar's wife. And he's in jail now. What does the Torah say? When the head of the jail sees who Yosef is, little by little, he turned over the whole jail, running the whole jail to Yosef. Again, this is not a midrash, it's in the Torah itself. And again, the Torah says that God was with Yosef, and everything he touched turned to success. So what can we learn from this? Yosef was a slave. He was in jail, but somehow he made the best of it. And that's why he's such an archetypal figure of this idea of Yakum, of get up. 7 times that Tzaddik falls, but he gets up. But here, Yosef, even when he's falling, he's in a fallen state, everything he touches is successful. It says because God is with him, but it's also because of Yosef's attitude. It's about his way of looking at the world. He had so much trust in God, is, okay, I'm sold as a slave. This is my situation. I have 2 choices. I could be overwhelmed by the darkness, as we learned in the first insight. I could be overwhelmed with depression about my situation, or this is what I have to work with, and I have to turn it around. I have to make it successful. So he becomes the figure, the archetypal figure of this concept of going down in order to come up. And also, even when he's down, he's able to turn the situation into something positive. So this is a lesson for all of us, because again, we all have our challenges. We all fall psychologically, emotionally, intellectually, professionally, relationship-wise. We all experience yeridot, falling. But the question is, do we stay there or do we get up? And so Yosef is a prime example that hopefully will inspire us. Okay, now another insight. And this is going to connect us very, very deeply to this parsha, but mostly the figure of Yosef in general. It's not as much with the parsha, but just understanding a bit about Yosef. So here we're going to go back 2 parshas, to Parshat Vayishlach, and at the end of the parsha, there's a passage called, "These are the kings that ruled in Edom before there was a king in Israel." And then it goes through 8 kings. 7 kings, it says the same thing. It names them. there's no mention of their wife. So-and-so ruled and he died. And then the next king, whose name was so-and-so, he ruled and he died. Goes to 7 of them. The 8th one, so here I'll mention his name. His name is Hadar. And it says he was married, and it mentions his wife's name, Mekeitz. And it doesn't say that he died. So you read this parsha, this passage, and it's like, I'm not sure what it's trying to tell me. And maybe it's just telling me what the history is. These are the names of the kings that ruled in Edom. And that's all it is. The Arizal, and we've discussed this, people who have been following these classes, we have discussed this many times. The Arizal saw the deepest secrets of creation in this passage. And he explains that the 7 kings that rule and die, these represent what is called Shvirat HaKelim, the breaking of the vessels. That when God created the world, first he contracted his infinite being in order to make a place for a finite world. So it's called in English like a vacuum, a chalal panui, a vacuum. Into this vacuum, God shone a ray of light into the middle of the vacuum. And through that ray of light, everything that would ever be created came into being. This is very similar to the idea of the Big Bang, that this ray of light into the middle of the vacuum is what we call the Big Bang. And everything that would ever be created came from that original explosion. And so explains, though, that when this ray of light comes into the world, there were many previous worlds to what we call this world. The previous world was called Olam HaTohu. This is from the 2nd verse of the Torah. The earth was chaotic and void. So the chaotic is that the lights that were coming from this ray were so pure, strong, enlightening, that the vessels of creation could not hold them. And they shattered. And each of the kings represents one of the sphirot that shattered. But then you get to the 8th king. Now, obviously, this is going to connect to Chanukah, the 8 lights of Chanukah. The 8th king, his name was Hadar, and his wife was Mekeitz. And it says where he came from. Some of the others also mentions their place. His place was called Pa'u. And that Mekeitz comes from Me Zahav. That was the name of her father or grandfather. Me Zahav, which is literally waters of gold. So what are we going to do with this? So it's told that the Arizal, every night of Chanukah, he would read the verse about one of these kings. And on the last day of Chanukah, a special day called Zot Chanukah, when we light all 8, that he would read the 8th king. And that represents Olam HaTikun, because when the vessels shattered, they shattered, and the light also was spread everywhere. And the Arizal explains that our world, the world that we live in, is made up of the broken vessels of the previous world and the the fallen light. And that's why he called this world Olam HaTikun, the world of rectification. And that's the importance of the Jewish concept called Tikkun Olam, of fixing the world. Because this world is all about fixing. It's all about healing, all about rectification. And so now we're going to connect it to Yosef. So this eighth king, his name is Hadar. And at the end of the Torah, Moshe Rabbeinu gives all of the tribes a blessing. So listen what he says to Yosef. The one for Yosef is fairly long, but one of the verses is Bechor Sharo Hadar Lo. In English, it's the firstling of his herd. One second. Is glorious. In other words, Yosef became like the firstborn, because Yaakov took the firstborn away from Reuven because of something that Reuven did. And he basically made Yosef, that's why the firstborn gets a double portion. And that's why Yosef, his double portion was both Manasseh and Ephraim become tribes to inherit the land. He got a double portion. So it says, Bechor Sharo Hadarlo. Yosef, you are the firstborn. And it's like a symbolic that the firstborn of the herd are the tribes. Hadar Lo is glorious. And then the blessing continues. So here we see a deep connection between Yosef and this eighth king, Hadar. So if that was all it was, we'd say, oh, maybe it's a coincidence. But the Torah tells us where Hadar lived, in a place called Pa'u, Pei Ayin Vav. The gematria of Pa'u equals Yosef. Equals Yosef. And another word that equals Yosef is Zion, Zion. So here the connections, like the plot thickens, right? The plot thickens as to who Yosef is on an archetypal level. He becomes this figure of rectification. The family is broken. The brothers sell him. And as soon as they sell him, they realize, oh my gosh, what did we do here? Especially when they went back and they showed Yaakov, they tried to fake that he looks like he was killed by an animal. They dipped his coat in blood of a goat. And they said to Yaakov, do you recognize this coat? And Yaakov, his conclusion is that a wild animal must have killed Yosef. Yosef says an amazing thing here, that, so who is this wild animal? This is the wife of Potiphar who attacks him. Who attacks him for sexual purposes. And that's how he ends up in jail for 12 years. So that's what Rashi says, that Yaakov, he had like this unclear prophecy of Yosef being attacked by the wife of Potiphar. So here we see that Olam Hatikun, the world of rectification. So Yosef, going back, so the brothers realized, oh my gosh, what did we do here? And as part of this last week's Parsha, it was Yehuda who said, let's not kill him. Actually, Shimon and Levi wanted to kill Yosef. And Yehuda said, no, we can't do that. Let's just sell him. And Yehuda was the leader. And so they listened to Yehuda. And then later they blamed Yehuda, said, why did you tell us to sell him? You're the leader. We would have listened to you. So Yehuda went away from them. It was a broken family. Everyone was broken. Yaakov is broken. The brothers are broken. Yosef is broken. But when Yosef gets out of jail, he becomes the second most powerful person in the world. He saves the whole world from famine. And then when the brothers come 22 years later, after his dream that they would bow down to him, that's exactly what happened. So here, Yosef has all the power in the world. He recognized them, but they didn't recognize him. And so Yosef, at this point, he can decide, either I'm going to take my revenge or I'm going to fix my family. And he goes through, that's what this whole parsha is about. He goes through this very elaborate plot to try to force the brothers to understand the gravity of what they had done. And he succeeds. I'm skipping a lot of parts here, but we'll only see the success in next week's parsha by Yigash, where he finally reveals himself to his brothers and he makes peace with them. And so Yosef is called Yosef HaTzadik. Yosef the Tzadik. Remember in our last insight, the idea of Sheva Yipol Tzadik V'kam. 7 times a tzaddik will fall and he gets up. And we said Yakum is Gematria Yosef. But here, he becomes the figure of rectification. Like I said, he had all the power in the world. And so, according to tradition, he's called Yosef HaTzadik. And the version that is usually given over, why was he called the Tzaddik? No one else is called the Tzaddik, is because he was able to refuse the advances of the wife of Potiphar. We all know the power of the sexual urge. And here, the wife of Potiphar is, by all accounts, a gorgeous woman. And the temptation, the Midrash says, it wasn't just the sexual urge. The Midrash says the entire Yetzer Hara of the entire world came against Yosef. And he was able to overcome. So he's called Yosef HaTzadik, Yosef the righteous one. And the tzaddik is always relating to the sphere of Yesod, and so is Yosef. But Hasidic thought gives us another perspective of why he's called the tzaddik. Can we even imagine how much Yosef went through? And for 22 years had to live with the idea that his own brothers sold him into slavery. And now they come and they bow down to him. Did anyone ever have like the power to take revenge like Yosef did? But he didn't. He didn't. And afterwards, he even says to them 2 different times, he says, don't feel bad about what you did. God had a bigger plan. God meant it for the good. He sent me before you in order to be able to feed you. So can you imagine the level that Yosef reached, that he could forgive his brothers, he could get past it, and not only that, but he could come up with a plan to get them all to do complete tshuva. That's why he's called a tzaddik. So just in the few minutes that are left, so we know that there's a tradition that along with Mashiach ben David, the Mashiach that we're all waiting for, there is a concept, it's already given over in the Talmud, of a figure called Mashiach ben Yosef, a messianic figure, the son of Yosef. And we're told that this Mashiach, we don't know how it will happen, we don't know the circumstances. He will prepare the way for Mashiach ben David. And so here we see that this eighth king, Hadar, he's the only one that it's mentioned that he was married. And as I mentioned, Yosef is always connected to Yesod. Yesod, the sphere of Yesod, is always connected to what's called Tikkun Brit, the rectification of the sexual energy. And Hadar, this eighth king, being married to Mekeitz, represents the tikkun of the other kings that weren't married. They weren't married. They had a serious flaw. And so I remember Reb Shlomo used to, a little bit tongue-in-cheek, when he would talk about Mashiach, many times he would say, Mr. and Mrs. Mashiach, that there will be a Mrs. Mashiach. And later, I'm sorry, I can't tell you the exact source, but it's in one of Rav Ginsburg's books. He actually writes an entire piece showing that this is one of the big tikkunim of Mashiach, that he will be married. And he shows as like a proof text that we know that there's two aspects to Mashiach ben David. That according to tradition, the nefesh and the goof of Mashiach will be an incarnated David. But the neshama of the Mashiach is Moshe. And that's why they say about Moshe, Hu HaGoel HaRishon, Hu HaGoel HaAcharon. He is the first Redeemer, and he will be the last Redeemer. Look at the first two letters of Moshe's name, Mem Shin. Look at the first two letters of Mashiach, Mem Shin. Moshe will be incarnated into Mashiach. But what happened to Moshe? That at a certain point he separated from his wife. It doesn't mean he divorced her, but as far as intimate relations, he separated from his wife. And Moshe had his reasons. He understood that that's what God wanted for him, no one else. But according to Kabbalah, Moshe needs to fix this. And Rav Ginsburg says that that's why this idea of Mashiach needs to be married. It's very similar to the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. The Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur cannot do the avoda unless he's married, which is very different than Christianity, and the idea of a priest is someone who is celibate. In our tradition, on the holiest day of the year, the high priest had to be married in order to do the service. So this is the idea of a great tikkun that's alluded to with his eighth king, Hadar, and his wife Mekeitz. I'll just add one thing. If you take the numerical value of Hadar and Mekeitz, it equals Isha, woman, 306. Hadar is 209. Mekeitz is 97. If you add them together, it equals Isha, 306. So what is that teaching us though? This is what's called the part of the final tikkun that we've been talking about, is what's called tikkun chava, the fixing of chava. And in fact, the fixing of Adam and Chava. And so this is the last hint, is we mentioned that Mekeitz comes from Me Zahav. Me Zahav equals 64, equals Adam Chava, Adam and Eve. So here, in very deep allusions, deep hints, we have seen a deep connection. And of course, as we said in the beginning, the eighth king is represented in the 8 lights of Chanukah. The 8 lights of Chanukah represent this light, all of the shattered vessels. As it were, the Chanukah becomes the fixed vessels, and the lights that we're lighting become all the scattered light that we've identified and revealed and brought them to a state of healing and rectifications. And so we'll end with just an important statement by the Lubavitcher Rebbe that on the 28th of Nisan, soon before, it was a year or something before he had his stroke, and he told everyone, I've done everything I can to bring Mashiach. The rest is in your hands. So you can imagine in Chabad, this is like an earthquake. It was like the Rebbe was saying, I've done everything I can. It's up to you now. But in this talk that he gave, he said, I can tell you one thing that has to happen to bring Mashiach. It's called Orot de Tohu Bekelim de Tikkun. We have to take these awesome lights of the world of Tohu. Remember, these are the lights that shattered the vessels. They're great lights. There was nothing wrong with the light. It was the problem that the vessels couldn't hold the light. He said to bring Mashiach, we have to take these awesome, pure, holy lights, and we have to create the proper vessels to hold them. That's what Tikkun Olam is. Tikkun Olam is about creating vessels that will hold the light. And so the Lubavitcher Rebbe, he did his part. He sent shlichim, messengers all over the world to set up Chabad institutions, to gather together all of the light and create the vessels that will help bring the Mashiach. So, Bezrat Hashem, I hope everyone like me is praying for miracles like right now. We really, really, really need a lot of tikkun. the world is engulfed in darkness, that we can see the how many nations in the world have taken sides with Hamas, and even those who have taken our side, it's like somewhat reserved. There's a mass confusion between good and evil here, and light and darkness. And so let us all pray that this Chanukah, that something, we need a fundamental change in the world. And we're praying that God will help us, that God will reveal to us how to make this change, how to open up people's eyes, people's consciousness, to be able to tell the simple difference between good and evil, and light and darkness. May we be blessed this Chanukah. Zoom.